Thank you all so much for joining us for our first town hall of 2026. This, I think, is the perfect way to kick things off. We're really excited about our speaker and our partnership with Paradigm Therapeutics today. So thank you all so much for coming. I'm so grateful to see so many, like I said, new and familiar faces joining us from all over the world. I see families on the line, supporters and donors, industry folks, some doctors and researchers as well. So just a big, big welcome to everyone. To kick off the new year and this town hall, we're honored to be here with Paradigm Therapeutics to talk about their journey to develop a whole body topical therapy for patients across all subtypes of EB. I know that this journey has been a long one that I'm sure a lot of you have been following, and it's not finished yet, but Dr. Robert Ryan is here to share some really exciting insights into this drug's development, and we're so thrilled to have him here with us today. You'll hear from Dr. Ryan as he provides an overview of the development of SD-101, the results from their previous clinical trials, and their goals in 2026 and beyond as Paradigm continues to work to bring this treatment to patients all around the globe. Then we'll do our usual Q&A session, and we'll wrap up with some exciting initiatives that we're looking forward to early in the new year. Just to provide a bit of the format for today, we ask that everyone please stay on mute to respect our speakers. Like I said, we are going to save time for questions during our dedicated Q&A session towards the end. So if you have a question, there will be a time for it, I promise. We're going to prioritize the questions that were pre-submitted when you all RSVP'd. And of course, we'll do our best to answer as many of those as possible. And if we have time, we'd love to be able to take some questions from the chat as well. So feel free to populate questions in the chat when they come to your mind, and we'll go over them during our Q&A session. Before I pass it over to Dr. Ryan, I just wanted to start with a bit of context of why we're all here today and give some helpful background on EB Research Partnership, some of our progress and some of our goals as well. So for those of you who might be a bit newer to us, EB Research Partnership, or EBRP, was founded in 2010 with one big, bold, audacious goal, and that is to treat and cure EB as quickly as possible and to pioneer a path for the 10,000 other rare diseases out there, 95% of which have zero FDA-approved treatments. EBRP is the largest global nonprofit funding research dedicated to treating and curing EB, and since our inception, we've raised over $80 million towards this goal. And thanks to the generosity of two very dedicated EBRP supporters, we can also now say that 100% of every single dollar that we receive goes directly towards funding innovative EB research. And thanks to our donors and to our amazing EB community, we've been able to fund more than 180 really innovative and exciting and impactful EB research projects, which has in turn led to a complete transformation of the EB landscape. We've gone from just about 2 clinical trials when we started to now more than 50, over half of which EBRP has directly funded, and most importantly, from 0 treatments to now 3 FDA-approved treatments. And now I mentioned that 95% of all rare diseases have 0 FDA-approved treatments. So really for EB to be in that 5% is incredible, and of course the result of so much hard work from the patient community, and of course the dedicated researchers and the companies that are powering these treatments. But something even more staggering is that actually only 0.08% of rare diseases have 3 or more approved treatments like EB does. And while we're really proud of that and honored to have been a part of this amazing achievement, we know that there is still so much more work to be done, and that these treatments are wonderful, but they're not for every subtype, and our community needs more. They need cures and they need them urgently. So our team is more laser focused than ever on delivering just this to our community. And to achieve that, we need to continue to fund and to accelerate the most innovative EB research around the world. Just last year, in 2025, EBRP funded 29 impactful projects across 7 different countries, totaling just over $4.6 million awarded. And these projects span all EB subtypes, and they include a really variety of unique approaches from gene therapies to cancer treatments to exon skipping, drug repurposing, protein therapies, stem cell therapies, the whole gamut. And excitingly, 100% of the projects that we funded in 2025, whether it be their technique or their target or their technology, really has the ability to impact rare diseases in general, just beyond DB. And half of the funded projects were identified by the researchers who submitted the application as, by medical definition, definitive or curative. And this year, we want to reach even bigger milestones to build off of this really exciting momentum that we've created. So we actually currently have an open call for applications with a deadline of March 13th. So if there are any researchers here on the line, please consider submitting an application. We'd love to be able to review it. Our only requirements for funding are that your work aims to A, meaningfully improve the quality of life of those with EB or aims to be curative, and B, that your work can be commercialized, really just meaning in the hands of patients, for example, in a clinical trial in the next 1 to 4 years. As always, it is our goal to fund as many of the most impactful projects as possible, which of course is done under our pioneering venture philanthropy model, so that world-class institutions can continue to advance life-changing breakthroughs for our EB community. And then when those, breakthroughs become commercially successful, we can reinvest those returns to be able to fund more and more EB research until that cure is found. So that's just a bit about us. But now, the reason why you're all here today, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Robert Ryan, who's going to be leading our discussion. Just a bit of his bio. Dr. Robert Ryan is currently the CEO of Paradigm Therapeutics, a biotech company based in South Carolina focused on the development of a whole skin surface topical therapy for the treatment of EB. In addition, Dr. Ryan is also the co-founder and CEO of Innova Therapeutics, focused on the treatment of various cancers. Dr. Ryan was previously CEO and co-founder of Scioderm, which is a company that developed a topical therapy for rare genetic disease, namely EB. Scioderm was the first biotech to receive a breakthrough therapy designation from the FDA and was also recognized by Fierce Biotech as one of the Fierce 15. I love that name, considered as one of the most promising biotechs in the world. Dr. Ryan has more than 35 years of research, pharmaceutical, and biotech experience, spanning the global development processes from clinical through phase 4 trials. Dr. Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We're so honored to have you. And with that, it's my pleasure to pass it over to you.
Great. Allison, thank you very much. So one of the things first, I want to thank EBRP. It's an honor to be able to do this town hall. And I'll talk a little bit about, our company and background, but just to give a little perspective, I've been involved with families with EB since 1999. So it's been about 26 years. And I'll talk about the journey that my wife and I have moved forward with to try to find a therapy that could really help families. So I'll give you a little bit of history on that. If you go to the next slide, please. So again, Paradigm Therapeutics, and I'll give you a little bit of background on that. Our mission statement basically is threefold. One is that we want to develop and hopefully get approved a safe topical therapy that can be used across subtypes. And that's where a lot of our trial work has been done. It's been across the three predominant subtypes, simplex, dystrophic, and also junctional non-Hurlitz. The other thing that we've done, and I'll talk a little bit about the data, is our hope was to have a therapy that you can treat as young as possible, because that's critical, especially during the first year, because the immune system is so immature. So again, that's one of our main goals. Also, we tried to develop a therapy, this was way back where I had an opportunity to interact with patients, to try to manifestations on the skin surface that patients feel some type of therapy is needed. Obviously, I hope in our lifetime we find a cure, but the key thing here is that therapies have gotten approved. There's a lot of them in development. So the thing that I'm really happy about, and I think we made an initial part of this way back, is that there's a lot of focus on this disease. And the more we focus, the more the opportunity to get therapies that are better and better. And then the last thing, again, with our therapy, is we're trying to, at the point if we are able to get this program approved, is try to have it a situation where the pricing will make it available for patients on a global basis. And that's one of the key third mission statement. Next slide, please. So again, as I mentioned before, I've been involved interacting with EB families since about 1999. But I guess it was about 8 or 9 years later, my wife and I had always hoped to try to develop a therapy. And it was really at that time more of a topical. And I worked with a group for many years to develop a topical therapy that could be potentially treated across the entire skin surface and have attributes that could benefit patients on multiple capacities. And I'll talk about that. So the path for this therapy that we're talking about today actually started back in was about 2008, 2009. Dr. Amy Paller at Northwestern actually agreed back then to conduct what was called at that time an investigator-sponsored study. And the FDA allowed us to conduct that study. This was before we were actually in clinical trials to treat patients. Actually, it was a small study, but it was across three subtypes. And these were patients that actually had very extensive wound burden. Most of them had at least 50% above their body. So the key thing here is we had a study. It was a short term. It was a 3-month study. And the results that we had with Dr. Paller, even though this was an open label study, were actually quite good at that time. And that led to us continuing the process, which is now SD101. And again, our focus is developing it as a whole skin therapy. And I'll talk a little bit about the trials. And that's been the focus of our trials. It's across the whole skin surface. For people that have been following us, and I can, if there's questions about it, I'm happy to talk. So SD101 was originally developed under a company that I had founded, which was called Cyaderm. And now that product had been acquired by another company, and we brought it back, and we're going to complete the development under Paradigm Therapeutics. Go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview. So that for those that have been involved in the trials, they're probably familiar with this product, but for those that are not, so what we have is it's an emulsion cream. It's almost like the consistency of cold cream, but a little bit thinner. Goes across the whole skin surface. It dissolves very quickly, so it does not stick to bandage, does not leave a residue. The tubes are 8-ounce tubes that we have at this point right now. There's no preparation needed. The material can be stored at room temperature. And a couple key things about the attributes of SD101. And this has been also that we had in our phase 2 and phase 3 trials. There were no bandage requirements after application. So we had some families who had patients or the patients themselves that bandaged, some didn't, but there is no bandaging requirements that we had in our clinical trials. The other thing, because I was involved in actually the development of this particular therapy, is I wanted to find a therapy that would actually penetrate the different skin layers, but with the hopes of not getting any systemic absorption, even though we know this product, even if it's systemically absorbed, we've demonstrated that it's safe, but it's not systemically absorbed. So it's basically locally delivered across the skin surface. So what I'm going to do is go through just some of the summary of the development program. And like I said, I want to leave it open to people's questions that you may have on our program previously and where we're going now. So to date, we've conducted 2 placebo-controlled studies. So we had a placebo, which is exactly the same as the SD101 with our active therapy, but it doesn't have the active therapy in it. So it's a fully matching placebo. So we've conducted 2 trials. They're called SD003 and SD005. And we've also, in both of those studies, allowed patients that completed the studies to roll over onto active therapy and receive the active therapy. And those 2 studies were called SD004 and SD006. We've treated, just to give you a perspective, a total of about 217 EB patients. And this has been across, as I mentioned before, the 3 main subtypes. And they were treated. What we found in our phase 2 study, we did a dose response, and we found that the 6% of our therapy was the most active. So again, locally delivered, and patients were eligible to participate in these trials from 1 month and older. The other thing to mention here on the open label, we had, and I'll talk a little bit about it, we had long-term safety in patients. To give you a perspective on the interest on patients after they completed these studies, the 003 and 005 were 3-month studies. We had almost all the patients that wanted to continue on open label therapy. And we have data out in some patients in excess of 3 years. So we have very, very good long-term safety that's been conducted in the open label. And just as a summary, and this is both in the blinded studies and also in the open label study, the cream was very well tolerated. The other thing that I think is real important to understand, so this is put over the whole body, so not only right onto wounds directly, but also onto intact skin. And it was very well tolerated from the patients. I'll go to the next slide, please. So just to give you a summary, and this is what we've seen to date in the clinical trials, and I mentioned there's been two trials done, the 003 and the 005. And this is comparing the active treatment, which is the 6% versus the matching placebo. And this was conducted again in patients that were 1 month and older. So we had quite a range of families to have a patient or themselves to participate. So some of the data that we've seen in our trials is that one of the key things with our therapy is that it closes closed chronic wounds. And that's been seen, there's a couple of therapies that are now out on the market that was their main focus in looking at the impact on target wounds. A couple other things that we looked at and we saw a benefit on the treatment arm versus the placebo is we also looked, and this was done by the investigators at each site, is they made an estimate of what percentage of the body is covered in open wounds and blisters. And then at each visit, that was estimated again. And what we saw is we saw a reduction not only in wound coverage, but also in blister coverage. So that's important because it was something that we saw across the entire skin surface. The other thing that we saw with our product, in addition to closing target wounds, which was the primary endpoint, in wounds that closed, we saw faster healing in the treatment arm versus the placebo. So not only did we see a benefit in terms of closing the wounds, but we saw the wounds that closed with our treatment arm that closed faster versus the placebo. A couple other things which I think are just as important, especially with discussions we've had with families and so forth, is we've seen with our product that we've had a significant improvement, including reduction and or elimination of itching. And this was noted within 7 days of treatment. And we monitored this through those studies, which I said were 3 months. And the importance here is the first 7 days of treatment was actually, there was a daily assessment. It was either by the patient themselves, depending on their age, or the caregiver, on what the level of itching was across the body. And what we saw again, and this was a completely blinded situation, we saw an improvement within 7 days. And that continued throughout the study. The other thing it was initially as a safety situation, but it actually, for patients with epidermolysis bullosa, is actually a very important potential efficacy benefit. So the investigators in the studies, in addition, when they were evaluating the extent of wound coverage across the body, they also looked for any visible signs of skin infections. And again, these are dermatologists that are very aware in many cases of visible signs of infection. And again, this was in a blinded situation. And in the phase 3 study, which was 169 patients, the 005 study, at the end of the study, there was a 48% reduction in observable skin infections in the treatment arm compared to the placebo. And the key thing here, too, this was conducted by what we tried to do to make sure we had consistency by the same investigator, did all the assessments during the study. So again, impactful in terms of trying to reduce the situation which could lead to sepsis. Other thing I mentioned before, we've got very good safety data to date. And again, this is applied not only in intact skin, blistered areas, but even in open wounds. And patients continued on to the therapy for a long period of time. Go on to the next slide, please. So we're in the process of finalizing up a study, which we hope will be the last study we have to do, but we're finalizing up with discussions with the Food and Drug Administration. What we're planning to do once we get full agreement and we've had discussions is we're going to do one more study, which is going to be a randomized, similar to the other studies, where it'll be a double blind. So it'll be a placebo arm and it'll also be a treatment arm. But this study is only going to be 2 months. We're planning to do it only in 2 months. And so patients will be on either placebo or the treatment arm for 2 months. And then what we are offering is the patients to roll over onto open label therapy. So at the end of the 2 month blinded situation, if patients desire, they can continue on with open label therapy. We're planning to do it in again, all 3 subtypes. And again, it's going to be applied daily over the entire skin surface. What we're planning to do as far as the design of the study, and again, we're waiting to get final agreement, is We're going to look at patients that are 12 years or younger at entry for this study. And again, the key thing is they can be either confirmed diagnosis of simplex, recessive dystrophic, or junctional non-Hurlitz. Once we get the finalization of the protocol, we have potential sites that are identified, and obviously, once we get that information and get approvals through the ethics committees and so forth. But as you can see here, what we're planning to do is have sites not only in the US, but also in Europe, Canada, South America, Mexico, Malaysia, and Australia. The other thing I'll put here, and again, sites will not be, we won't have that information until we get full approval at the sites and everything is ready to go. But we do have an email address, which is cure@capati.com, which is the research organization that's going to be conducting our trial. If you want to contact them and there's potential questions or you're interested in potentially participating once we have the sites up and going, if you get a chance, please send that email. Please email them, and then they'll keep you in the database. And once sites become active, they will let the sites know. Obviously, we will not know who will be involved in the trial, so we're basically walled off from knowing that. But that's something that they could forward on to the sites once particular sites that might be in your region are open. Last slide, please. So again, our overall goals, this is not only for this year, but also beyond, as Allison was mentioning before, our goals. So we want to conduct and complete this study. We hope, if everything goes well, that we will support regulatory filings, not only in the US, but outside the US in 2027. We're trying to work as quickly as we can. It's very, very important to the whole team. My team has been involved. Many of them were at Scienderm, so we've worked with this product since as early as 2013. So it's really important. I mentioned before about pricing. That's a very key thing for us, and we're going to try to make sure that if we're able to get this out on the market, that we can make it as accessible to as many patients globally as have interest in being involved with this program. Last thing just to mention, because it's been a little bit of a lull with us being involved with the SD101 program. We welcome anybody that's been involved with the SD101 program previously, that we would love to gain your insights and thoughts on the therapy, because it's been a while since we've discussed a lot of families. I know this was a short presentation, but I think the key thing is I wanted to make sure that we have enough time to make sure that we can answer questions. So I'll stop there, Allison, and you can let me know as far as questions, and I'll try to answer them the best I can. So thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you so much. I mean, Dr. Ryan, your dedication to this community and just your passion for bringing this treatment forward. I mean, it's really outstanding, and we're so grateful for you and your work and your wife's work as well. So thank you. I
Thank
see
you.
there's a couple questions coming into the chat now. Maybe we can start with this one, Dr. Ryan, and then we can move to some of
Sure.
the pre-submitted ones just while there's one in here. Elizabeth is asking, can you tell us a little bit about how the ointment and therapy works?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So one of the things we know is that the active ingredient in our therapy has been demonstrated to have multifaceted impacts on different parameters. So, for example, we know that the active stimulates wound closure. So that's one thing. We also know that it's a potent anti-inflammatory. Um, but we also know, again, these are things that have been demonstrated in, outside of EB, that it also has an impact on bacteria, whether it's a bactericidal or bacteriostatic. The key thing here, which is very interesting, and this is back even when I started working on this program way back, is they're really not understood exactly. Each one has been looked at independently in EB, and they really have not been very effective. So just things that heal wounds or something that's an anti-inflammatory. But what we've seen, even back as far as Dr. Paller's study, is that, again, some of the things that we know about this active, I think it's a combination. Now, which one is more important? I think they're all important to a certain impact to have the benefits that we've seen. So I think, as far as a specific mechanism, it's not like a gene therapy where, for example, where they're looking at trying to impact a defect in the anchoring fibrils. And one of the things we have seen, which is I think important, even with these different multifaceted impacts of our active, we've seen consistency across the different subtypes. So, it's like other therapies at this point. It's not curative. I hope there is a cure at some point with EB. But the key thing here is we think that we can have, and we hope to demonstrate and get out on the market that this can have multiple impacts on manifestations that patients have said that are very, very impactful as far as when their skin is compromised. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ryan. And I know we have a lot of pre-submitted questions to get through, but
Sure.
just because this one I saw in the chat seems to kind of piggyback off that last question, could
Yeah.
you elaborate on how the mechanism is different from that of Filsevez, which also has anti-inflammatory properties?
Yeah. Filsavev is what's called a birch bark extract, and I know it has multiple components that are in there, but as far as its mechanism, I don't know. I know, one of the things that it's supposed to be as far as anti-inflammatory, but I don't know the other mechanistic characteristics of the active ingredients that are in that product. I don't know that answer.
No, that's helpful. Thank you so much. Okay, going to some of our pre-submitted questions, although, like I said, everyone feel free to keep popping into the chat. I'll be sure to check that as well. Someone, and I think this is maybe something that was answered already, but just to read it out loud, Dr. Ryan, this
Yeah.
person says, I'd like to better understand what the timeline is for a topical therapy that junctional can use. It seems like junctional EB can sometimes be deprioritized because there's so few of us. What can we do to speed this process up or to get involved in clinical trials?
Yeah, so I provided the information when we have our trial coming up. And like I said, if there's interest, because we're going to, patients going to be across the three subtypes, please send, an email to that site. And once we get the sites up or to that location, once we get the site up and going, the site's up and going, they will definitely forward your information onto the different sites. So we're trying to get that trial started as quickly as possible. We're going to try to do it. Sometime as quickly as possible this year. And we're working very diligently. The team's working hard. If everything goes well and we get this, the key thing is getting it enrolled. Our goal and we hope is that we're going to file sometime, I would say mid next year is what our goal is. If we enroll the trial quicker, it may be sooner. If it takes a little bit longer, it may take a little longer. But that's our goal next year, just to hopefully have it filed.
That's super helpful. Thank you so much for that timeline. Another question here. I know you did mention in the presentation that this could be applied to the whole body, to intact skin, as well as wounded skin. But another
Correct.
question, kind of similar to that, is, fingers crossed, once this is something that's able to be prescribed, how much treatment would be given to patients? For example, they say it's great that it could be applied to intact skin, but of course they'd want to make sure that there's, enough in a dose to go around per se.
Yeah, so just to give you a perspective in our trial, so patients put it over across their whole skin surface on a daily basis, and we have it in 8-ounce tubes. That's clearly the same as our plan once it's out on the market is have it accessible enough that patients can apply it across their whole body. So it's not going to be a situation where it'll be limited to, just on a single wound. Our plan is with the development and hopefully launch, and our pricing is that the pricing would allow the patients to put it across their whole body, not limited just to a specific region.
Okay, that's very exciting. Thank you. Another question pre-submitted is, how are potential adverse effects assessed in patients with EB prior to clinical trials?
Yeah, so what is typically done, so when a patient comes in and gets screened, and let's assume that the screening worked and they're going to go ahead and eventually randomize them into the trial. What you do is you collect a background of what adverse events they've had. And so you basically have a medical history with all the different side effects or things that they've had with the disease or other health issues they've had in the past. And when you go into the trial, what's called treatment emergent adverse events. So you look for adverse events in the trial, and it's typically under one or two categories. One is something that hasn't been seen previously by the patient or the family or the caregiver. So something that just showed up in the trial that wasn't previously documented as far as medical history. The other thing they look at, it could be something that was shown previously, but they look to see if that has gotten worse. So that's what you monitor in the trial. So you look for any new adverse events, but you also monitor on their medical history if things they've had in the past have gotten worse. So that's the way you monitor it during the trial.
Great, thank you so much. A couple questions around age, it seems, as well. So maybe to
Sure,
just try to loop a couple things together. We had a question about the target age group, and if I remember correctly, I think the new trial was children 12 years or younger.
that's
Kind of tying
correct.
that with another question, is there a reasoning behind keeping the trial to this age group? And are younger folks, do they tend to respond better to this cream, or is there other reasoning for that?
No, so a couple things. So the one thing that when we've had discussions with regulators about doing basically a trial at this point that we can demonstrate what we've seen previously and confirm. And that's why one of the key things for us, we wanted to go in what I would consider the highest risk patient population, although there's risk at every age, is we felt that this trial was the best study design at this point to focus on basically children. We have the other information already, um, but that was the rationale. It's not because we anticipate that it's going to work only in a certain age group or something. We just felt that that was the best for us to move the trial, enroll it, and then have it out as quickly as we could.
Oh, that's really helpful context. Thank you for explaining that. And this person is asking, I know you probably touched on this in terms of where the clinical sites will be, but maybe thinking of this from like an approval standpoint, will this therapy be made to be accessible globally?
That's our goal. That's clearly our goal. It's not just a situation where we're trying to have it accessible for patients in the US. Um, what our goal has been from day one is to, assuming everything goes as planned, is to make it accessible globally as fast as we can. Because as you know, it's something that's not limited to the US, not limited to South America, Europe. Um, it's something that, like I said, that's what our focus is. It's not limited just to US.
And that's so amazing to hear because I know that's really can be a struggle for some of the other things that
Absolutely.
we're lucky to have access to in the US, but others unfortunately are not. A question here is as has there been a subtype that responds to the treatment in trials better or worse than any other particular subtypes?
Yeah. So what we've seen to date, and again, in our trials we had more recessive dystrophic, but we also than we had for simplex and junctional, but we had a very large um, group in both of those groups. What we've seen is, especially as far as looking at the target wound, and we've looked at composite data. The good part is we've seen benefit regardless of the subtype, and that's very, very important. So to date, it's not been limited to a certain subtype. We've seen it across the subtypes.
Okay, that's really exciting. Thank you. Another question from the chat this time is you mentioned that you can apply this to skin that's not currently affected. Can it prevent blisters?
Well, that's what we're hoping. I mean, it's not part of the endpoint, but again, all I can speak on it, and this is back many years ago when we did the phase 2B study. Um, I had the opportunity to talk to some of the families that had rolled over onto open label therapy. And again, it's anecdotal, but it's things that I've heard from the families. Is a couple things. One is it seemed like their outbreaks were less. Now, how do you quantify that? I don't know. But the consistent message I heard from a lot of families that this seemed to help in terms of less outbreak. Obviously, if you have a physical trauma, there's not much you can do. But what we did assess is when we looked across the skin surface, we didn't look at just wound coverage. We also looked at lesional skin, which includes blisters
Mhm.
primarily, and we did see a reduction. So we saw it not only in terms of closing wounds, but also an improvement in lesional skin, which includes blisters.
Okay, I think that answers maybe Nisha let me know if you have a further question, but I think maybe that answers your chat question as well. So perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Ryan. Um, a question from Yang in the chat here. Assuming this trial is successful, what would be a realistic timeline for the product to reach the market?
Well, I mean, I think the key thing for us is how quickly we can enroll this study. Um,
Right.
and if we can. if we're fortunate enough to enroll it quickly and it's completed in early 2027, we have all the other pieces in place, obviously, than other than just putting in this information. If we're fortunate enough to file, um, let's say in the US, for example, or mid to early next year, let's say it's by second quarter, assuming everything goes right, the review period typically with the agency for a priority review, which we should get, is about 6 months. So if everything went well and we were able to file second quarter next year, then we would hope to have it approved by the end of next year. We're also going to be looking at filing in Europe, and then obviously, other countries sometimes will follow on with that based on the U.S. approval. We've also had group discussions with groups in Japan, for example. Um, so the key thing for us is, like I said, is to get it filed once we have all the information, assuming that we're going to be successful. And I'm confident we will be. But the key thing is we've got to do the trial and finish it up as far as enrollment.
Of course. And I think maybe that's a good segue to this next question, because I know you talked about the countries that you're hoping will be sites for the trial. But are you able to share what those study sites actually might be? What institutions you'd be partnering with?
Yeah, and we can't do that until we get the ethics approval of the sites. But again, we've got multiple sites in the US, we've got multiple sites in Europe, South America, and then I mentioned specific countries like Malaysia and so forth. Once we get the approvals at those sites, it goes through ethics and so forth, then we'll be able to that's why that website or that email is so important, because then we'll be able to provide, and we'll put it into clinicaltrials.gov as sites become active. So we'll make sure that people are aware. But we can't name them yet because we haven't gone through the final approval process at each of those sites.
Of course, thank you for sharing that. That makes sense. And I'm just going to re paste that email in the chat for everyone listening in case that's helpful. Another question from before, if I was part of one of the prior trials and I still meet the requirements for this one, am I eligible to participate in the new phase 3 trial?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. Another question, and I know there's probably not data on this yet, but maybe even, something just in speaking to prior patients, do you know if this will be able to be applied if you're on one of the currently approved FDA treatments?
So one of the things, because the two of them, two of the topical therapies, obviously there's the skin therapy now too. But in order for them to be eligible for the 2 month study, they would have to go off that therapy for 30 days.
Okay.
So that would be a requirement. But it's a short period of time. And then, like I said, the nice part is the trial itself is short before they can roll over. But they would have to go off if they're on Vyjuvek or they're on Filsaviev. They would have to go off those therapies for 30 days prior to entry.
Okay, thank you. And speaking of the open label therapy, someone was wondering if you could just talk a bit more generally about how patients continue on to open label therapy. For example, is this common in clinical trials? And are there patients that are still receiving this treatment today?
Okay, so a couple things. Yeah, as far as in my experience and everything, if especially in a situation like this with EB, is having open label therapy. It serves twofold. One, for patients that are participating in the trial, and to allow them to stay on the therapy and hopefully benefit them long term. So we'll collect obviously some efficacy data long term. The other key thing, because we're going into patients that are young, is it was very important for us to collect safety data because it's a chronic therapy at this point. So that's why the open label studies were very important. And I think you asked about how they would go on to it. So basically, in this 2 month study, if patients completed it at the 2 month visit, then they would be eligible to continue on. They would be eligible to receive the open label therapy and continue on that at home.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful to know. Another question in the chat here. I think you mentioned this a little bit a couple questions ago, but just to clarify, for Nick here in the chat, what surface area can a single 8-ounce tube cover? Is one tube enough for multiple days of whole body dosing?
Yeah, so just to give you a little bit of perspective, and again, I'll just say an average 12-year-old, because obviously if the patient's younger, they're going to use less, and if they're older, they're going to use more.
Right.
Um, an average 12-year-old uses several tubes a month. Um, so depending on the patient, anywhere between 4 to 6 tubes, sometimes less, sometimes more, because they put a thin layer over their whole skin surface. So that gives you an idea on the average. So obviously, for a child that's smaller, it would be less, and for an adult, it would be more.
And that was 4 to 6 tubes a month?
Yeah, they're 8 ounce tubes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that just gives you kind of a middle of the road. And like I said, some use less and some use more, depending on their age.
Right. Yeah, I think that's helpful to picture. So thank you. Another question in the chat here. Based on the first couple of trial phases, approximately how much faster did blisters or wounds heal versus the normal duration?
Well, in the phase 3 trial, and again, we were looking strictly at um, wounds that closed in both the treatment arm and the placebo arm. And the in the wounds that healed in the treatment arm, I don't have the exact number, but it was about 50% faster. So than in the treatment arm than they were in the placebo arm on wounds that healed.
That's very exciting to hear. Thank you. And just going back a couple questions to, having to go off for 30 days, one of those approved therapies. Someone
Yeah,
specifically is wondering, would a participant have to go off of Dupixent if that's something that they're on?
no,
Okay,
no.
great to
Even
hear.
though, like I said, we're going to be looking at itching. Obviously, I know, with Dupixent, with Dr. Power and others. But since that's not something that's going to impact the primary endpoint, we would not require that at this point. We're not planning to.
Okay, I think that's positive news, so thank you. And then another question in the chat, is genetic testing required for enrollment in EB simplex trials, or I guess specifically for this trial?
Yeah, and again, Williston's on the call. In the past, that was the main requirement, but also, and I'd have to get back to you on that to be 100% certain. And Williston may be on the other line shaking their head. It's a confirmed diagnosis, so it's something that we would have to. I mean, obviously, genetic testing is the ideal situation, but we'd have to talk with the investigator based on their clinical diagnosis and what information they had as far as diagnosis, especially in simplex.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I think that's our last chat question. So maybe I'll just give folks another minute or so. If there's anything else that's on your mind, feel free to pop it into the chat now. And while we wait for that, maybe just our last question, Dr. Ryan, that was pre-submitted. Again, I think this was probably something that was answered generally, but just to make sure that they have their question heard. I've been following the development of this medication for several years. My daughter and grandson have EBS, generalized moderate KLHL24 mutation. Their wounds
Right.
are generally a result of a direct contact friction and usually more of a shearing injury. They don't necessarily blister very often. Would they use this medication directly on specific wounds for healing?
Well, it's like I said, the way our studies were designed, and it'll be in this trial here, whether it's simplex or dystrophic or what the other are junctional, is they apply it over the whole skin surface daily. So it could be, like I said, it could be applied onto blisters, it'll be applied onto intact skin, open wounds. So it's basically a daily application across the skin surface.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for clarifying that.
Yeah,
Um,
Allison, I saw one question. I don't know if it was in the chat before, but somebody was asking about um, we were talking about, below age 12 and so forth. And I think there was somebody that asked about 1 month and older. The reason that we have, at least in the trial, that were planned as patients that have to be at least a year old is because one of the things by definition is we're looking at the target wound as a chronic wound. And by definition, it's at least 21 days plus old without any appreciable healing. So I'm hoping once we get this program and finished and so forth and have the discussion with the agency about registration, that this will be a therapy that patients could use beginning at birth. And I know that's been done recently with Vyjuvek, where they've expanded theirs into treating patients basically at newborn. That's what our goal is.
yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for touching on that. That makes sense with, of course, the definition of chronic wounds, but that's important context to understand. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you to all of our attendees for participating in this session. I think that was easily the most questions we've ever had in the chat. So thank you so much. We really appreciate that. I think hopefully that makes it, productive and engaging, not only for you, but for the other attendees who are listening. So thank you so much again. Just to quickly wrap some things up, we always like to end these with how can everyone on this call take action? Of course, hopefully, if you're able to and interested, participating in this trial by reaching out to the email that we provided, but also generally, how can you help support EBRP's mission to heal EB? We've got a couple of ways that are coming up. As always, we're looking to fund as much innovative research as possible. Like I mentioned, we've got a cycle open, and we do have those two very dedicated and generous donors who underwrite our operations so that truly every single dollar that we raise goes directly towards EB research. So we hope that you'll consider making a tax-deductible donation to support that work. And I think we have the link coming into the chat there. We also, as I'm sure you've all seen by now a bunch of times, but we just could not be more excited. Matter of Time, our documentary, is now going to be streaming on Netflix in like 2 weeks now, starting on February 9th. So be sure to check that out. It's a really, really powerful piece of storytelling and awareness. And it's not just available in the US Netflix, it's Netflix globally. So wherever you are in the world, be sure to spread the word and tune in starting on February 9th. And lastly, just to reiterate here, we do have that open research cycle. Just wanted to be sure to share the link in the chat if you're interested about learning more about our guidelines or our process. And the link to submit your application is the same link that's in the chat there. So just wanted to make sure that that was available to our research committee friends that are on this call. Um, and that's everything, folks. Thank you so much for taking the time today to join us and to learn from the amazing Dr. Robert Ryan, and to learn from each other with your questions. We hope to see you next time. We'll be sure to reach out once we have our next town hall scheduled. But until then, thank you all again so much for participating, and I hope you have a great night.